Good morning, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of my 2024 garden favorites. If you missed part 1, be sure to check it out here. But today we're going to jump right into some of my favorite varieties from the 2024 garden. As a reminder, I'm growing in Midwestern Ohio in Zone 6A. First up, we have probably everyone's garden favorite, which is homegrown tomatoes. I had a couple of really interesting varieties this year. The first was a variety by the name of Dwarf Emerald Giant. And this variety hails from the Dwarf Tomato Project, a community-driven tomato breeding project which has had some really interesting releases. I've grown a few other varieties from the Dwarf Tomato Project in the past, which I've really loved, including Tasmanian Chocolate. So I had high hopes for Dwarf Emerald Giant, and he did not disappoint. Really nice dwarf, compact but robust plants. This one had a potato-type leaf, growing to only about 3.5 feet tall. But despite that small size, this one had really good production of nice beefsteak style tomatoes. Now, I often find that green tomatoes have some of the best flavors, and this was the case with Dwarf Emerald Giant. This was probably the best fresh eating tomato of my trials this year. I'd describe it as fruity, almost citrusy, with that really nice acidic tang finish at the end. Now, the trick with green tomatoes sometimes can be telling when they are at peak ripeness. What I liked about Dwarf Emerald Giant is it puts on a slight pink blush on the underside of the fruit, so you can tell when it is ready to be picked. Now, texture with tomato can be a deal breaker for me. They can have the best flavor ever, but if they're at all mealy or mushy, I'm done. Luckily, Dwarf Emerald Giant did not. It was really nice, firm, meaty, just an overall great eating experience. The nice thing about this one too is for folks that are limited on growing space, or you want to do containers, even if you're like me and you have plenty of space, but you want to grow 1,000 tomatoes every year and you maybe don't have room to do that, Dwarf Emerald Giant is great because you can just kind of tuck it in anywhere due to that compact size. Another favorite tomato this year was the Oh My Swarm. If you're like me and love heirloom black tomatoes like Purple Cherokee or Black Crim, but have been disappointed by their lack of production or the fact that they're prone to cracking, this is a really great one to try. Straight out of the gate, this variety was markedly different. I could see the difference from very young seedling stage. They were incredibly robust and sturdy compared to the 20 plus other tomato varieties that I was growing. As the season progressed, they continued to impress me. The production on these plants was massive. These stay rather compact, so my plants only got about 4.5 feet tall, but just tons and tons of fruit on these things. When the fruit ripened, it was big and beefy and this really beautiful, rich, deep brick red, purpley color, what you'd like to see with your typical black tomatoes. And best of all, they had a really rich, robust flavor and a meaty texture. Now, this variety was bred in Carbondale, Colorado at 6,400 feet and supposedly has cool soil tolerance as well as a tolerance to light spring frost. I did not get to test this out personally, but this might be a really good option for folks with a very short, cool growing season. Now, the next tomato winner was one that I did as a combination indoor grow, greenhouse grow. So I started them very early in the season under lights, had fruit production, but brought it out into the greenhouse to allow those to ripen. And this one was Canary Kiss Tomato. I actually did a group of 4 of these kind of what I classify as micro dwarf tomatoes this year as these indoor and greenhouse grows. They were all really impressive, but Canary Kiss was by far and away the flavor favorite of the family. So in this grouping of micro dwarf plants, all of these plants stayed in that kind of 12 to 20 inch plant size. Very, very compact. But this group, including the Canary Kiss, have been some of the most productive microdwarf plants that I've grown. It really put on a ton of fruit. So this one was just an average cherry-sized tomato, this beautiful golden with kind of a little bit of pink striping. Great flavor, very sweet with a nice little bit of an acidic kick. The kids loved this one. I had them taste all of the varieties, kind of did a blind taste test thing. And this was, like I said, this was everyone's unanimous favorite. Because it was a greenhouse grow, I didn't really have any issues with pests or diseases. The marketing says that this one is appropriate for growing both indoors and outdoors in the garden. I'm kind of curious to test this out in the garden next year and see how it does. But for an indoor grow or a greenhouse grow, this is a great variety. Now, similar in appearance, but very different in growth habit was the next tomato winner, and that is Tropical Sunset Tomato. This one is part of the Cream of the Crop program, which is a joint breeding program between Frog's Leap Farm of Minnesota and AP Whaley Seeds of Wisconsin. And so many varieties that I've tried from this program have just been excellent. They do really, really well in my climate. They have some of the disease resistances that I need. They are robust, they are healthy, and best of all, they are really looking at flavor. So I've gotten some exceptionally flavored varieties from this program. Now, I first grew Tropical Sunset at the trial farm I was working at in 2018, but this year is the first year that I've grown it in my home garden, and it did not disappoint. Now, surprisingly, this one is actually an open pollinated variety, but I would not be able to tell that from looking at it. It has hybrid vigor. It is very disease resistant. It is resistant to cracking. So that's an issue I have sometimes with cherry tomato varieties is they are very prone to cracking, and they produced all season long. They've got great flavor. And just a beautiful cherry tomato. Again, that kind of golden with a slight pink striping. And these are big, indeterminate, very productive plants. So I grew these on my cattle panel trellises. They definitely need some kind of big support if you're going to do them right. And my final tomato winner this year was another selection from the Cream of the Crop program. And it is the as of yet unnamed SLS 32 tomato. I have been asking for tomatoes with septoria leaf spot resistance for years, so I was beyond stoked to see someone finally paying attention to septoria leaf spot resistance in tomatoes. Again, with this program being partially based in Wisconsin, they're dealing with a lot of the same disease pressures that I am here in Ohio, and they recognize that septoria leaf spot is an increasing issue for this area of the country. In addition to septoria leaf spot resistance, SLS 32 also has early and late blight, bacterial spot, and a plethora of other disease resistances. So when I grew this out in the garden, it stood head and shoulders above my other tomato varieties in terms of plant health because of all those disease resistances and because it has the specific resistances that I need here in my growing area. But I know as home gardeners, it's really hard to get excited about disease packages in our fruits and vegetables. It's important, but it's not the sexy part of gardening. That's why I was really happy to find that this tomato has great eating quality. It's an unusual size, so it's something that the industry refers to as a cocktail-sized tomato. Slightly larger than a cherry, but slightly smaller than your typical slicer. That's the only downfall I found with this one is it's kind of an annoying size. Like you can't just eat it whole like you would a cherry. It's great for slicing though. Great for roasting up in my roasted tomato recipe that I usually do. But it had great flavor, really nice acid sugar balance, great texture, beautiful red color. So it had this really nice, brilliant scarlet color through and through. So it looks really nice sliced up on salads and such. And again, massively productive, very healthy plants. It's an indeterminate, so it produced all season. This is one that I will probably be growing every single year from here on out. I was just really, really happy to find a variety that remained so healthy all season long here in my Ohio climate. One last veggie favorite from the 2024 garden was a bean mix called Vivid Spirals Dry Bean Grex. According to Wild Mountain Seeds, they've had success planting this one 2 weeks before their last frost date in their Grow Zone 4 climate. My season here is plenty long enough to grow most any type of shell bean, but these did seem to be very quick to mature and dry down. They received no supplemental watering this year, so they also appear to be quite drought tolerant. And these beans are just beautiful. a diverse mix of colors and spiral patterns. Very, very productive too. I also grew the Vaquitas Grex beans from wild mountain seeds, which I liked, but I felt like the Vivid Spirals mix was by far the heavier producer. Great cooked flavor and texture too. Now, every year I typically do quite a few annual flowers in the garden as well. I don't have as many flowers to mention this year because I just replanted a lot of my prior favorites, but I did have a few interesting plants that I wanted to mention. First up was the Food Not Lawns Remix Poppy. Everything about this mix was delightful. Even though I sowed them late, it got super hot and dry this spring. I'd just kind of given them up as a loss. I didn't think I was going to get anything. They ended up growing beautifully, blooming like crazy, and just looked fantastic. The sturdy stems didn't flop in the summer storms, and I was gifted with a plethora of diaphanous, multicolored blooms. I have always loved poppies, but for some reason I've never grown them here in my garden. I was kind of kicking myself that I did not grow this mix sooner because they were so easy and they looked so nice. Thankfully, I was able to save a ton of seed this year, so I will be able to plant them out from here on out in the garden. Now, just a note, these are of the variety Papaver somniferum, also known as the infamous opium poppy. Under the Controlled Substances Act of 1970, Papaver somniferum, together with poppy straw and concentrate of poppy straw, is considered a Schedule II substance, and it's illegal to grow opium poppies for drug use. But thanks to some rather ambiguous language in the laws, it's generally overlooked when you grow them in small amounts in your home garden. Just don't follow in the footsteps of the Washington state farmers who planted 40 acres of opium poppies and were subsequently busted by the feds. My next favorite flower this year was Bagua Morning Glory. This one is an improved heavenly blue type for more northern climates. I've always grown heavenly blue because I adore the color, but it really is a long season flower. I often don't get blooms until almost October, and then I'm only able to enjoy them for about 2 weeks or so. Bagua bloomed months earlier for me, and I got a full season of color with this one. The blooms also stay open later into the day than typical morning glories. Now, what would the garden flower assortment be without sunflowers? This year's favorite was a variety called Orange Hobbit Sunflower. This is another one that I actually grew in 2018 for the first time, but I regrew it this year. There's something that I just adore about these dwarf statured sunflowers. I love big giant sunflowers, but these hedge types that grow somewhere around the 2 to 4 foot height mark are just really nice. I think because you kind of can get more up close and personal with the blooms. Orange Hobbit is also a multi-branching type. So rather than being like a cut flower type where you get a singular stalk for cutting, this sends out tons of branches along the stalk. So you get an extended bloom period. You also get the impression of more blooms because there are so many blooming stems coming off of that main plant. This growth habit is very similar to another long-standing favorite of mine, which is the Gurney Sunny Hedge blend. But Orange Hobbit has more of that, what I would call a classic sunflower appearance, where it has that very dark central disc surrounded by the golden orange ray of petals. Just a really lovely plant in the garden. Now, my final kind of ornamental type plant winner for this year was Cotton. And the variety is red foliated white. Now, this may have been the most fun I've had growing a plant ever. It may seem kind of silly to some of you Southerners, but I've never grown cotton in the garden before. I was over 20 years old the first time I ever saw it in a field. So this really was a novelty for me. Cotton is a marginal plant here in Ohio. The red foliated white variety was 120-day maturity, and that's about the shortest maturity that I found. Most varieties have an even longer maturity than that. They like a really long, warm summer growing period. So I didn't quite get my plants to full maturity in the garden before the frost hit. I started them indoors in late April. I should have probably done at least early April April to give them even more of a head start. But something I didn't realize was with cotton, even if those bolls aren't opening before the frost comes, you can cut your plants, hang them someplace warmish and dry, and some of those bolls will open eventually on their own, which is what I ended up doing. I hung them in the barn and then eventually moved them to my front porch, and quite a few of the bolls did end up opening, like weeks, even months later. So I ended up with a fair amount of homegrown cotton. Now, I won't be able to make my own organic cotton sheets or anything, but I do have enough to kind of play around, do some craft projects with. The other nice thing that was with this particular variety, it was a really beautiful ornamental plant. So kind of a dark red, purpley color. The photos do not do it justice. It was so pretty out in the garden. This is one, again, I will be planting for years to come because it was just so much fun. Now this year, I wanted to mention a few runners up as well. I don't typically do runners up in these trial winners videos, but this year was an exception. I think, again, because of the difficult growing conditions. And I just had a few where they were so close to perfect that I felt like I had to mention them. Now, the first was Zai butternut squash, which I may be pronouncing wrong, but I can't find the correct pronunciation online. This one just had incredible growth and vigor. So definitely not a variety that you want to plant if you are limited on space. These vines just went all over my garden and they had phenomenal plant health, pest resistance, and disease resistance. This was by far the healthiest winter squash or pumpkin variety that I had in trial this year, probably of at least the last 5 years. I don't think I've grown a plant quite like this since I grew Seminole in terms of just that plant vigor and that plant health. What sucked me in when I was going through my catalogs picking out varieties for this year was that the marketing for this one said it was bred specifically for resistance to downy mildew and to tolerate variable and unpredictable climatic conditions. And this year was a great test for that. And it definitely did exactly that. Now, interestingly, this variety is still a work in progress. So the breeders are still actively selecting for improvements in terms of fruit size, shape, uniformity. And I'm really excited to see how this variety progresses and what some of the future iterations of this one are. The only reason that I didn't give it, full trial winners honors is this was such a long maturity for me that I didn't end up getting fully ripe fruit. They were pretty close. I was able to get them into the greenhouse and let them kind of finish curing in there. But because they weren't at full maturity before the frost, I did get a little bit of stringiness in that flesh texture. But again, I think if I would have gotten a bit more of a jump start on these, the results may have been different. So like I said, I'm excited to try this one again or to try future selections of this same variety because it definitely has a lot of promise. Now, my other runner-up this year was a cucumber, and it is Gateway, which is an American slicer type cucumber. And I decided to test this one out because of its impressive disease package, which included resistance to anthracnose, downy mildew, powdery mildew, and much more. And it really did live up to those claims. It was by far the healthiest cucumber in my trial this year. Typically, with a lot of less disease-resistant varieties, I will plant them out, typical time around mid-May. I will get 2 to 3 flushes of fruit, and then the plants all go downhill because of pest and disease. This one continued to produce almost the entire season. It showed very good resistance to cucumber beetles, which I was surprised by. It was massively productive. My only complaint is that it is an American slicer. So of all the types of cucumbers, American slicers are my least favorite. This is a very traditional type. A lot of this kind of variety has been grown for decades. But what I find is that they do tend to have a tougher skin. They also tend to be prone to being bitter. It's probably probably going hand in hand with the toughness of the plant, honestly. And there are definitely workarounds. I mean, once you slice these up, if you skin them, you slice them up, you toss them with some salt, put them in salads, you don't even notice that. But because I'm often out there eating these fresh from the vine, that's how I do my taste test when I evaluate these varieties, is I'm just out there eating these out of the garden. I'm getting some of that bitter flavor as compared to what I typically grow for fresh eating is like a Bait Alpha type or Persian cucumber. I also love the Japanese slicers, the Dutch hothouse types, which have no bitterness and have very thin skins, but they are also a lot more disease prone. So it's kind of a trade-off. Really, a slightly bitter cucumber is better than no cucumbers. So I will take that trade-off. I will probably continue to grow this one just to have a nice, reliable, all season long variety that I can count on, and then grow my more finicky, slightly tastier cucumbers in tandem. But really overall, I was impressed by the performance on this one. So that wraps up all of my favorites for the 2024 season. Again, if you missed part 1, check that out here. And definitely go, and if you're interested, check out my prior year's favorite videos as well. And if you enjoyed today's video, please consider subscribing to my channel, Growfully with Jenna, so you can check out more content like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.